ICQ Podcast Episode 347, RSGB Q1 Review. Well, hello and welcome, fellow Amateur Ham Radio enthusiasts, to this our 347th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Michael Burdock, Kilo 6, Golf Tango Echo, Christopher Naylor, VK3, Tango Lima Alpha, along with our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB is joined by Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, to discuss the latest Amateur Ham Radio news. Myself, Colin, M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief. And this episode, we've got a double feature where we're getting an update from the RSGB on their activities during Q1 this year, and as well as a discussion regarding radio and scouts. Now, first off, I'd like to welcome our new friends that are joining us, that met us at the QSO Expo a couple of weekends ago. We had intended to run as a features episode our recording of the talk we gave in relation to rebranding amateur radio. Unfortunately, those who attended QSO Expo will know that there were some glitches and some gremlins around the system, and unfortunately the audio from that show is not usable. But don't fret, we're going to get the band back together again, as they say, and we're going to record it again and hopefully use that in a future show. So bear with us, and as I say, we'll get that sorted out again and re-record that feature. Now, it's our donors that keep us advert-free here on the ICQ podcast, and some of our listeners who show their value in what they get from us every fortnight, along with our monthly subscription donors, is Michael, Kilo 6, Golf Tango Echo. And quick simple message, thanks for the great show, guys, 73s. So thanks a lot, Michael, for being involved. And Chris Nader, VK3 Tango Lima Alpha, says he's a new listener, only discovered the show recently. He just got his foundation entry-level license in Australia, and he's really enjoying the show. All the best. So thanks, Chris, for your very kind words, and Michael, and your great support, and that support along with our monthly and subscription donors, as he pays our ways and keeps this show advert free. If you enjoy what we do, all we ask you to do is to think of a monetary value, you find value in the show, and then go along and visit icqpodcast.com/donate and say turn that value into a figure, select one of the options on the page and pop it our way, and say you'll be doing your bit for keeping your amateur radio show broadcasting on the air, and say most importantly advert free. Right now we're going to join Martin, Leslie, Dan and Edmund to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur ham radio news, including the age of amateurs and post-Brexit callsign changes. As always, hope you enjoy.
The ICQ Podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, hi guys. Welcome to this episode's ICQ Podcast, episode 347. And tonight, the news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I have with me Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB. Good evening, Leslie.
Good evening, Martin, and it's a good job we don't record the outtakes, isn't it?
Well, only your ones, Leslie.
Oh, thank you.
No. I've been quite honest, and I spoke to some guys yesterday for the feature, and I openly admitted we do not keep bloopers. Apart from yours, where you're trying to see if a Cadbury's cream egg floats in tea.
It was scientific research, let me tell you.
I know, but that's the only one. And in fairness, I think a lot of people would be very worried talking to us if we did keep the bloopers. So, dear. They've gone, mate. They've gone. If ever we do a live session, though, be prepared. Be prepared, guys. That's all I've got to say.
I'm in trouble already.
Yeah. Okay. Moving the outside the pond, we have Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Cheers, guys. See, I'm learning how to speak English.
You are. And you also said keeping Leslie under control is above your pay grade. I agree with you.
That's right. You don't pay me enough to do that, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you.
I'll tell you what, it's going to be a silly one tonight. But hey, it's all fun. Moving back to the UK, Mr. Edmund Spicer, M0MMG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah. Well, you're going to keep us on a straight and narrow then, Edmund, tonight. So I think we're a bit giggly tonight. And we haven't been on the brown nectar, which is a bit of a shame. But there we go. Right, starting off with our first news story. Ofcom have just released an age of amateur radio data. Now, they've been asked for this data. It's half interesting. It tells you some things this news story does, but it doesn't really give us a full picture, in my opinion. Leslie, do you want to go first on this one?
Well, yeah, I agree with you, Martin. You're right. It doesn't give a full picture at all. The thing it says that Ofcom replied, and I'm quoting here, it says, Ofcom said, we do not hold a full breakdown of the age of issued amateur radio licenses. Of data's birth is not a mandatory field for license applications. Well, the thing is that if we want to know where the hobby is going forward, need to sort of make decisions based upon factual information, not what I mean. I know what I feel's happening, but you need the proper data to sort of say, yeah, this is where the age profile is. This is where we need to put resources to bring new people into the hobby, and what age should they? All those types of things. And if you ain't got the proper data, how can you really do it? Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, I kind of understand this because in the UK, we had to do a national survey last weekend. And I sat at the computer, and some of the questions Mrs. B was spitting feathers over. Why they want to know that? Why should I tell them?
I know. I filled it in as well.
Yeah, and there wasn't a Jedi option in the religion this time. I don't know. Sometimes I think they hold information about you that's useful. Other times, I just think this is just a waste of time. I mean, asking you what your sexual preference is irrelevant, really. But anyway, that's another story. Edmund, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, it's been just over 20 years since a date of birth was needed for having an amateur radio license, because there used to be a minimum age of 14, wasn't there? So the number of people where where Ofcom do have a date of birth on record is relatively small compared to the number of licenses on issue as a whole. So it's probably not enough to provide a statistically valid sample. So I agree with what Leslie says. Really, it's interesting, but I don't think it really tells us very much. And here's a thought, incidentally. Up until about 2006, to operate legally on CB, you had to hold a license, and if you were under 14, you had to be supervised by a license holder. That was then revoked when that was deregulated, so I have just discovered that on the face of it, for a 6-year gap from the turn of the millennium to 2006, you could be a 13-year-old amateur radio operator holding a full license, for example, and require no supervision at all. If you then switched bands to 11 metres and drop power to 4 watts, you would then need to be supervised by an adult. It's funny how these things throw up inconsistencies, isn't it? Back to you, Martin.
Thanks for pointing that one out. I didn't realise that at all.
Yeah, it's a license anomaly, isn't it? And there were lots of things. I mean, back when the 3-tier license system came out, I wasn't allowed as a full license holder. My license didn't allow me on HF, but a foundation license holder was allowed on HF until they sorted all the licensing out. So, hey, it's one of those things. It's there or thereabouts. The one that got me, though, as of the 1st of March, 95,044 UK amateur radio licenses. Well, that doesn't mean there are 95,000 amateurs in the UK, I believe, because a lot of radio amateurs still hold all 3 of their license codes. Their foundation, their intermediate, and their full. So even then, I'm not 100% sure we know how many we've got. Dan, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I first off, I think that's kind of bizarre, having 3 licenses like that. But, here, some of us have been trying to prod the ARRL to do such a survey for a long time. I know that's how I first got in touch with Frank, our fellow presenter here. And, he's the real statistics guy. And I guess the problem is something like that would cost a lot. But Frank has volunteered his time. And like I say, he's a smart guy. And I'm sure he would produce a really great survey. So I'm still baffled in a way on why we don't have this information, why the ARRL hasn't gotten something like this started.
Yeah. Well, as you said, with Frank, he does love his statistics, and it's always quite a shame because often news stories come up, like German news stories normally come up in this group when Ed's not around, and this is a statistical one that's come up when Frank's not around. But I think we can get something from it. It's difficult, I would suggest. You're filling in data. Depends on how much data you can get. With our Data Protection Act in the UK, can you release that data for people to do analysis work? And all these sort of things. They're a little bit difficult at the moment, but interesting. I think the things that stuck in it for me was up until September 2000, you had to be 14 to hold a full amateur radio license. And I don't think, from memory, well, there was what they called a novice license, which became our intermediate license prior to that. So I suppose you could have held an intermediate license, so the equivalent of which they called the novice, but you couldn't hold a full license till you were 14 up until September 2000. And 95,044 licenses in the UK. Nice number. Didn't know that. Right. Let's move to the next news story, because I don't think we're really sure quite how this goes. I'm going to give it to Edmund first, but there's a modified French amateur radio call sign for Great British nationals. I'm not sure whether this is if you're going to live in France or if we're going to drive through France. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
I was confused when I first read this, and I'm still confused now. This has come from the ANFR, the Agence Nationale des Fréquences, or the National Agency of Frequencies, which I assume is roughly equivalent to the UK's Ofcom or the FCC in America. And the English translation reads, after the United Kingdom's request to no longer be part of the European Union, nationals of Great Britain who come for the first time to France for a temporary stay are now assigned an F4W, Foxtrot number 4 Whiskey, type non-EU CEPT code. That to me sounded very much like a Google Translate type job, so I thought, well, I'll go onto the ANFR website and benefit from the purity of the original text, which is in French, but I speak French reasonably fluently still. And having read the French original, it turns out the English translation is very faithful, and it doesn't matter what language I read this in, I'm still confused as to exactly what it means. So yes, it is true that Great Britain has left the European Union, but the CEPT organisation is not the same thing as the European Union. And I've not seen or read anything anywhere from CEPT to say that any of the pre-existing agreements have been changed as a result of Brexit. So I'm rather confused here, because if you go and live in France full time, or if maybe you've got a holiday home out there and you were spending significant chunks of time per year living in France, say periods of more than 3 months at a time, they would issue you with a call sign. I suppose it's a reciprocal call sign, isn't it? That would start with the letter F, then have a number, quite often 5, but not always, and then the first letter of the final 3 letters in your suffix would be V for Victor. So does it mean that from now on, if you go out there and want a reciprocal license, if you happen to be from Great Britain, your call sign will start F4W rather than F4V? Or does it mean that if you go over to France, even for just one afternoon, as part of a, I don't know, booze cruise or something like that, and you talk to two people down the road from Calais or wherever you are on your 2-meter FM handheld, like what I've been known to do the past few Christmases, for example, then I can't just use F/Mike 0 Mike November Golf. I have to apply for a completely different call sign, because that would be a hell of a faff just for one afternoon's operating and maybe 2 contacts. But then I suppose it may have a novelty DX value, because I can't imagine there are going to be many F4W call signs on issue. So that's it, really. I will continue to dig more deeply into this in the days and weeks ahead, because I'd be quite interested to know if I do have to get myself an F4W call sign, if I go over to France just before Christmas with my work social club to get some cheap drinks, then I'll probably just leave my 2-meter handheld at home, because it's not going to be worth the effort. But I'm hoping it won't come to that, Martin. I'll let you all know what I find out.
Yeah, that'll be good. Well, I was worried because not only I am intending to go down to Friedrichshafen in the next few years, at least once, if not more. And I was wondering, does that mean that I can't operate in France? So I switched my car radio off when I get to Dover, and it can go back on when I cross the German border. The temporary stay doesn't give you a clue of what the temporary stay is. Dan, well, it won't affect you, but what do you honestly think of this? Are they going a bit stupid?
Well, I don't know if I'd say that. But if there was no guidance as to how you might apply for that call sign, how do they expect people to apply for them? You know what I'm saying? And then what happens when you get to when more than 676 people want an F4W call sign? I think there's lots of loose ends here. And then on top of that, I decided to just look up the F4W call signs on QRZ.com, and there are already 50 of them assigned.
Well, that's a big number, seeing as this is only supposed to have happened just recently.
Well, to me, it looks like these are mostly French names, so these are probably mostly French national.
Interestingly enough, there is a guy, Malcolm, and I haven't got your call sign in front of me, Malcolm. It's interesting, a Scottish guy with a French call sign comes up on our DMR talk group, and he's often driving from he drives back from Switzerland into France, so he's a Scottish guy driving through Switzerland with a French call sign. That gets me. And hi, Malcolm, if you're listening. This call sign thing is a bit strange at times.
Regarding the driving to Friedrichshafen, by the way,
yeah,
if you go through the Channel Tunnel or get off a ferry at Calais and you start driving eastwards along the road, is it the E5? I can't remember the road number, that basically hugs the coastline and takes you past Gravelines and along that way to the east. There's only about a couple of tens of miles of road before you're over the border into Belgium anyway. So for the sake of obtaining an F4W call sign, Martin, if it did come to that, I would simply just turn your radio off for a few tens of minutes between getting off the ferry and going over into the border into Belgium, and then your problem as regards the French would be solved.
Yeah, that means that I would go a different route, but hey, it's another option. So anybody going to Friedrichshafen who's not sure and going through Dover, that might be a better option to go up and round down through Belgium. I normally drive straight across France down the French motorways, get in that way, but I know other people do go the Belgian route.
Belgium is a great country to drive through, incidentally, Martin. I don't know if anybody's ever done this, but if you look at Belgium on a map, on an atlas, it doesn't look that big a country. If you go into it from the French side on the north coast there and drive across and down through Brussels and then into Germany, I swear to you, Belgium is like the TARDIS. It doesn't look that big on a map. You once start driving across it, it goes on and on and on. I swear to you, that country is bigger on the inside than it looks from the outside.
Oh, there you go. You heard it first from Edmund. What's your thoughts on this one, Leslie?
Well, I was slightly chuckling to myself about Belgium because I've been there for beer festivals on another hobby of mine. So, it's a great place, really nice. But one thing I did pick up is that this story has been provided kindly to us by a guy called Paul Caskill, G4MWO, he's the editor of the 5 megahertz newsletter. So I'd like to thank Paul for providing this for this particular story. And we used to work together, Paul, many years ago. So cheers, Paul. Good to hear from you.
It's a small world, us amateurs. We come across people that we know all around the world or we've worked with. And it's nice to catch up, Leslie. So that's brought back some extra on that story for you. Okay, moving on. This one I kind of liked. Dan, it's your side of the pond. Cooperative effort underway to resolve potential 77s interference issues. Now, it's not naughty interference, but I believe the White Sands missile range in New Mexico are starting to see some interference between 420 and 430 megahertz. This is used for repeater control. What's your thoughts, Dan?
Well, this is kind of interesting. So I'm really wondering, and of course, it's probably classified information because that's where they do nuclear weapons testing. There is what they consider a critical system, and why is that critical system operating on 420 megahertz? But that's, to me, that's fine. I mean, we're secondary users in that portion of the band, and we should be notified, and then those links move. That's all there is to it, really.
Yeah, I think a number of us amateurs forget that the certainly the 77s band in the States and the 77s band in the UK, we are secondary users. The military do have full rights there, and if you're asked to move, you don't pick a fight and argue, you move. After all,
yeah, that's right.
Martin, isn't there something about working within so many kilometres of a well-known London railway station, I believe?
Certainly is, Leslie. You and I suffer this. I think Edmund might just be out the range, but yeah, within central London, the Charing Cross is deemed the centre of London. And do you want to tell the rest of the story, or do you want me to?
No, you can, Martin.
Okay, when I joined the hobby, there is an exclusion zone on what frequencies you can use and what power you can use at the bottom end of our 77s band within 60 kilometres of Charing Cross. Now, Charing Cross is deemed the centre of London as an arbitrary point, and not far from there is the National Security Agency's building, let's put it that way. On the Thames, it's no big secret, people can see it, it stands out like a sore thumb. It's got massive aerials on the top, one thing and another. And everybody said, oh, you can't transmit on certain power there because of the Secret Service are there. That's not the case. The case was originally, years ago, when before mobile phones and things like that, there was national radio service that used to run from there. There used to be national trunk services for taxi cabs and various other radio systems. And on the 77s band, we're not allowed to transmit on certain frequencies above a certain level. So that's the truth on our licensing. So over to you, Leslie. What do you think?
It's all interesting, Martin. You're right. It's in both cases we're secondary users, and they're the primary users. And when we're asked to move or to cease operation or to change frequency, we just have to do it, and it's part of our license. And other countries have the same thing, and we're secondary users, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, it always is, and but that's it. Now, Edmund, you enjoy operating VHF and UHF. You're outside of this zone, but what's your thoughts on the story about if you lived close to a military base?
If I lived close to a military base, I probably wouldn't be transmitting on 77s at all. This story was a bit of a revelation to me, because I thought that 420 to 430 megahertz in the USA was reserved exclusively for fast scan television. I didn't realise there were repeater links as well, so I've learnt something here. And as Leslie has Dan, whoever it was, has quite rightly said, if these links, whatever they may be, are causing interference or potentially causing interference to the military, then it's up to us as radio amateurs, as secondary users, to relocate elsewhere. I mean, it's not as if the band is too small in the States to find an alternative frequency to use. And going back to what you said, Martin, about the famous Charing Cross exclusion zone, down here on the West Sussex coast, I do fall within that just, which is a real pain, because there are a couple of repeaters in the north of France and the Netherlands whose outputs are just above 430 megs, with the inputs 1.6 megahertz higher. And occasionally I can hear the outputs really, really strongly during lift conditions, and I know full well that if I were to transmit, I would get into the repeater and work people no problem. But because the input is just above 431 megahertz, because I'm not further away from Charing Cross, I can't do it, and that has been a source of immense frustration on occasions. But anyway, repeaters aren't supposed to be used for DXing anyway, as we all know, so it's very, very naughty of me to try and do it in the first place, and I will slap my own wrists for you, Martin. Back to you.
Well, you're enjoying radio and you're playing radio. There's nothing wrong with you trying to get into long-range repeaters, but I'm surprised. You must only just be inside the zone, that's all I'm saying, because I thought you were probably clear.
I'm only just, but I'm just the wrong side.
Yeah, well, it's one of those shame, Edmund. Maybe you'll have to sort of just relocate or drive out a few miles down the road and you'll be out of it, and then work them from a hill or something. All right, well, it's interesting because it does highlight the fact that the 77 band is shared with the military, both sides of the pond, and we have to abide by that.
A similar story just came to light in here in the U.S., and I think maybe we covered it on the podcast in some episode, but the FCC has just said that they will continue to allow amateur radio operation in the 3.45 to 3.55 gigahertz band.
Right.
And it's the similar situation here. We're going to be secondary users in that portion of the band, so we can't cause any interference to the primary users, but it's kind of a similar kind of thing.
Yeah. So I think going forward, let's face it, RF real estate is money. They can sell it off.
Oh, very much so, Martin.
And I think we will gradually become secondary users in a lot of bands. So we just have to be aware and be careful. That's all I can say on that one. And it's part of the hobby. We just have to accept it. Right, moving on to our last news story. Now, I've added this as a news story. It's been quite reasonably well covered in the feature. So it adds a different flavour to what probably the four of us are going to talk about. But The RSGB has a new EMF calculator available. Now, we've talked about having to do these radiation tests for some time. Leslie's written his own spreadsheet on this, which is very, very good. And I know you're doing talks for clubs. The RSGB have now got involved and done some work on this. And also Ofcom have a spreadsheet. So there's lots of information around at the moment. And I think both us and the RSGB are trying to unravel some of this to make it a lot easier to understand, because I think there's been a lot of hysteria on social media about this. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Oh, where do I start with this one, Martin? Right, I'll pick. I'm just got a screenshot of the RSGB one, the new one, which is version 0.1.2. It won't calculate below 10 megs because I know there's some issues involved, but I do know that the RSGB is on the case for that. So I would ask people to hold fire, and I know that that's in progress. So looking at their spreadsheet, it's as one would expect. It's nice and pictorial. It's got drop-down menus, which I really like. They're much better than mine, actually. Things like transmitter power, your mode factor, and your transmit receive factor, that's fairly standard stuff. And then you've got your feeder loss, then you've got your antenna, and that again, it's very simple drop down menus. There are some fundamental differences on this one to their previous one. I think this is a sort of improvement. And what it does come up, and one of the things that was confusing a lot of people is this idea about 10 watts EIRP. When you put the numbers into this spreadsheet, if you're below that figure, it will come up compliant. So that's a really good feature, and I like that. The other thing I need to mention is that Ofcom have produced a guidance document. Now it is a draft document, so it obviously it will be subject to change. I have to, and I've gone through it in quite some detail. I would say though that 95% of the discussion on the UK internet is pure froth. If radio amateurs are doing things properly with good radio housekeeping, making sure their antennas aren't stuck on the ground, that they've not got 200 watts in the loft and silly things like that. If they're doing things properly, this is not a problem. I can assure you on that. It's a lot easier than people make out. No, I've had 2 radio amateurs. I've helped get through this. We've not had this. Other countries have had it for years and years, and the UK we've had nothing at all for 40 odd years, and that holiday is now over. But I can assure radio amateurs, this is not the end of the hobby as we know it by a long way. We're not all doomed to use the expression for Dad's Army. I can assure you we can get through this. It's a lot more straightforward than people are making out. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. IBM had a terminology back in the 80s, and they used to talk about FUD, which stood for fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's all the internet has done to this. People have just gone off spreading all sorts of fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and lots of amateurs have believed what they've seen. Guys, you need to look at, if you're in the UK, you need to look at this, or Leslie's spreadsheet if you've been privy to having a copy of that, and I'm sure he'd probably send it to you if you asked him. And also, listen, look at Ofcom's documentation, look at the what the RSGB have done, look at what Leslie's done. It's not difficult to fill these things in. As I said on the feature, I did this for a boat owner the other week, and he was all panicky and telling me that all these yacht owners weren't going to do it because they didn't understand it. The thing is, a lot of this has to be done because it's now a requirement of your license. However, think about it. There are a lot of users or users of radio that don't have our knowledge, and therefore it can't be too technical because they've got to fill this in themselves. So just bear with it. Don't get upset. Edmund, I'm going to ask you next, because you're in the UK. Have you got any thoughts on this one?
Well, I can't really add anything in the wake of Leslie's comprehensive answer there, I suppose, because I have, shall we say, QRP tendencies. This isn't going to be so much of an issue for me as it would be if I stuck everything through a 400-watt linear amplifier. But what I'm really waiting for is the future version of this that will produce meaningful results for 40 meters downwards, because virtually all of my HF operating is on 40 and 60 meters.
Yeah, I do know that there is an issue with 10 megs, and it's they're very much aware of it, and they're trying to sort it. That's as much as I know at the moment. The other thing I would add is, for example, let's take your what you've said. If you're running QRP equipment, let's say a little FT290R, well, obviously that's going to be less than 10 watts EIRP by a considerable margin. The important thing is to document it, to make some form of record. Don't care how it's recorded, but it has to be written down somewhere. And that's a key requirement. If there's a flow chart, and in every sort of bit of that flow chart it says record, and then record. And if you do that, and just make a note of what you've done and how you've done it. And the rules are very, very flexible. They're not rigid as people make out. I know there's been quite a lot of, how can I put it, trainee run poll of the Baileys out there. It's just make a record, and that will suffice.
Yeah, certainly will. Now, Dan, I know it's a UK thing, but you guys have had to do this in the States for years. And I remember, when I did my exams in the States, there were questions about how much power you could run, and being aware of, don't point your beam antenna at somebody's house running 1500 watts and these sort of things. So it's been an awareness in the States for some time, hasn't it?
Right. In fact, there's FCC has put out a document which you can get from their website called FCC OET Bulletin 65. And I always tell my students to go ahead and download a copy of that and work through it. It does have like practical guidelines on how to evaluate your station. But I love the idea of having a spreadsheet. Somebody perhaps more knowledgeable than me should go through that FCC OET Bulletin 65 and the Part 97 rules and come up with just this kind of thing. That would be a wonderful thing. That way, anybody could download the spreadsheet and fill it in, and voila, they've got an assessment. And you talked about the boaters, the yachters. Well, to me, that sounds like a business opportunity, Martin. Tell them you'll do this for them for $100 a pop, and you can make a few bucks on it.
Yeah, I certainly could, but I suppose
that's a bit against my religion for taking money for my hobbies.
No, not from amateurs, from yachters.
Oh,
I think in fairness, and I try not to do this. Yes, you could. Somebody will do it, I've no doubt, but it seems a bit immoral to me to be taking candy from a baby.
Well, but not necessarily, because you're providing a service, and you could, and as part of your service, you can give them some education on a basic RF safety. To me, that would be, seriously, that would be a good service for them, because they, instead of just being, talking on the radio, they would at least have some idea of how to operate these things safely.
Can I make a comment on something you brought up? You're talking about OET 65. I'm very, very aware of that document. I've gone through it like a fine-tooth comb. And the reason is, one of the Ofcom things says that you're supposed to use your equipment in accordance with the manufacturer's instructions. Well, yeah, okay. But if you get, say, an ICOM 7300 if you look in the instruction manual for that, and that's a fairly modern radio, it does make reference to that document. People don't realise it, but it does.
Mm.
Okay, the document's a bit dated. However,
Right.
the power levels in the US are a lot higher than the UK. But the principles in that document are very, very good. And they do give people a really good guidance on what to do. And I'll really, that's to me is a good document to get an idea of what to do.
Well, I tell you what, since you probably know more about it than me, maybe you could write us a spreadsheet. Just kidding.
I've done a spreadsheet.
Yeah, but you put the U.S. Limits in there, or maybe tell me how to do it. I tell you what, I'll get in touch with you about your spreadsheet. I'll take a look at it and see if I can somehow put the U.S. limits in there somehow. Would that make sense?
I know exactly where to put the limits. Not a problem.
All right, good. Well, I'll contact you about that.
Okay, look forward to it.
Okay, so you heard it first. Dan and Leslie are looking into, no guarantee, but they're looking into doing something for you guys over in the US. And I think whichever country you're in, it is important. If we are, and I keep coming back to this, if we are responsible adults, we should be doing this sort of thing.
Fully agree.
Forget being gung-ho about it. Let's be responsible adults and show we are. All right, we've covered that one quite a few times. There's the RSGB have their say about it in the feature, so please listen to the feature. It is part of what they're talking about. Okay, let's find out what you guys have been up to since the last time we sat down together. Leslie, what have you been up to?
Well, apart from work, which has been driving me absolutely insane, so I'm not going to mention any more of that because I'm in a happy zone at the moment. What I've been doing is I've been putting a talk together for the Sutton and Sheen Club. That's in progress, as you know. I was asked to do it, and I'm going to do it. I'm definitely making progress on it, but I'm sort of pulling my hair out and saying, should I put that in, or should I? How can I make that easier? So that's where I am at the moment.
Yeah, that's good. I'll also say, and I'm being nice about this, you did join us at the QSO Expo on the Sunday. You rang me on the Saturday. And
I did. I did 5 nights.
Yeah.
And Saturday morning, I wasn't at my best. I mean, I looked in the mirror and I wanted a refund on the reflection.
Yeah. I mean, coming home from doing a night shift, Leslie, and then thinking you were going to do a full session on that.
No!
It weren't going to happen. It weren't going to happen. And I think I said to you, Leslie, go to bed.
I would call it beauty sleep, but no, definitely not.
But at least you took my advice, and we can giggle about it now, but it was a busy weekend.
I did come up on the Sunday, though.
You did. So, Edmund, what have you been up to?
Well, I also attended the QSO Today online hamvention on both days, and it was really nice to see and talk to some of our listeners. I won't try and list them all because I'll probably forget people or miss people out by accident, but you know who you are. So if you're listening to this, I was very pleased to bump into Randy, K7AGE, whose YouTube channel has got quite a lot of instructional videos on it and that I've learned a lot from down the years, so it was nice to see him on my screen. On the radio, 17 Meters seems to be the band to keep an ear on at the moment. There have been quite a few good openings recently and a few very directional openings. For example, last Sunday morning, the Sunday morning of the QSO Today Expo, the 17 Meters was open to Crete, and there were several stations audible from there, but nothing heard from Greece or Turkey or any of the other nearby countries. I suppose it could be that simply nobody in those countries had their radios switched on, but failing that, it did seem that it was a very directional opening to the island of Crete indeed. So 17 metres is my top tip for keeping an ear on. And last but not least, in a moment of wanton abandon, I was looking on a certain famous auction site, and a second-hand but mint condition ICOM IC7300 and desk microphone and automatic antenna matching unit were for sale there. Not cheap, but good value for what it was. And my finger accidentally pressed the buy it now button. So that's turned up here. But apart from drooling over it and turning it on and pressing some of the buttons and watching little lights come on and that kind of thing, I've not actually worked anybody using the rig yet. And I don't know if this is pure coincidence of timing, but using the IC7300 to listen on 80 metres, the QRM that I get from nasty, horrible switch mode power supply devices in the neighbours' houses seems a lot less bad on the 7300 than it does on my Yaesu 991A. Now, I know that's an older radio, but I don't know if it's just coincidence of timing that the neighbours have switched whatever it is off temporarily, or if it's that they haven't, but the ICOM, because it's that little bit newer and has got perhaps slightly superior technology inside of it. Either way, I can now hear voices on 80 metres again. So I might have to clip some extra wire onto my 40-metre inverted V dipole and line it up in such a way that it's nowhere near any of the neighbours' houses for EMF purposes, of course, and see if I can work anybody on 80 metres. And if I do, it'll be the first contact in about 2 or 3 years. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, Dan was going to say something.
Yeah, let me just say, I had an IC 7300 for about 2 years, and it is the radio. That radio is so quiet, I almost couldn't believe it. The radio I had previous to that was an IC 746 Pro, and I thought, it's a great receiver. I said, there's no way the 7300 is going to be that much better, but it was, and I noticed how much quieter it was. So, I don't know what they're doing in that 7300, but it's a very quiet radio.
Certainly is from what I've heard. I don't own one, but there you go. So, Dan, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Well, I also participated in the Virtual Ham Expo. I even gave a talk on teaching online classes, and that went pretty well. And I enjoyed talking with all you guys, and then I was in the CW Ops booth for a while, and I went somewhere else. I was talking to some folks, but anyway, I mean, despite their technical difficulties, I still think I had a good time anyway, and thought it was a worthwhile thing. My latest thing here is I've been working what's called the State QSO Party Challenge. And we have these sort of mini contests, if you will, called state QSO parties here in the States. And the idea is you work, if you're, let's say I'm participating in the Wisconsin QSO party. So the object of the contest for me is to work as many Wisconsin states as possible and as many Wisconsin counties as possible. The counties are the multipliers.
Yeah.
And the idea for people inside Wisconsin is to work stations both inside and outside Wisconsin. So there's quite a number of these in the states. We have 50 states, so you'd think there'd be like 50 of these. Well, there's actually like 47 or 45. I forget the exact number. And some guy got the idea to aggregate the scores from all the state QSO parties and have like the Uber State QSO Party, and he's calling that the State QSO Party Challenge. So I've been trying to work every single scheduled state QSO party, and then you report your scores on 3830scores.com and send in your log, and then they they aggregate them. And at the end of the year, they'll have awards for whoever's worked the most, gotten the most points, in other words. And I'm not trying to get the most points because I just don't have the station for that. But what I want, they also have like a participation certificate. So if you operate in at least half of these state QSO parties, then you can get this certificate certifying that. So I've managed to work every single one so far, and it's been fun. It's been a lot of fun.
That sounds like it does sound like a lot of fun. I'll give you that, and I'd say good fun. Right, what have I been up to? Well, let's start off with Talk Group 9480 on Brandmeister. That seems to be kicking along quite nicely. I know you managed to get into it now, Dan.
I have.
You have, yeah. Last count this morning, there's been over 90 ICQ podcast listeners that are using the Talk Group in something like 19 different countries, 19 different countries. So, it's not just your time zone. There will be other people on different time zones. All I will say once again is blipping it is no good. If you just blip it, we don't know whether you're there or you're just doing something. So put a call through. A number of people have been quite surprised who comes back to them. And as I say, there are people on from all around the world at various times. So you put a call out, hopefully somebody will come back to you. And as I say, the number of people there is growing almost daily of people who've found and got on that talk group.
Can I just slip in a comment on this?
You can, Dan, please.
So I got on Sunday, and it's a Saturday or Sunday. It was about 11 a.m. here, and I put my call sign out, and VK6 ADF came back to me, and we had a real nice chat. So like Martin says, there's users from all over the world, and I think it's going to be probably a pretty cool thing. I'm glad you gave me that prod on the last episode I appeared on to get my radio programmed correctly.
Yeah. Well, I believe from what you were saying earlier, and I also spoke to Phil, VK6ADF, that every time you've gone on, you found somebody on the group.
Yeah, the first 3 times I gave out a call, I got a reply. So that's pretty cool too.
Yeah. Well, that's what it was meant to do, generate and get people together to talk together. So that was good. On the Curacao Today Expo, yeah, like just about most of the ICQ presenters, we were there. Yes, there were technical difficulties. Enough said about that. I hope Eric manages to sort it out. Did I have a good time? Yes. I was probably on for 14 hours a day for the 2 days. I probably did 28 hours. That's probably why I'm half dead at the moment, because I haven't fully recovered from it. But it was a great to chat to a lot of people. Thoroughly enjoyed that. We did a presentation. I believe we had 198 people in the room for the presentation we did. Unfortunately, guys, due to a technical problem at the Curacao Today end, our audio has massive chunks missing out of it. So there was a good video. There was quite a good discussion. But unfortunately, it was unusable to let you guys have it because there's big chunks missing out of it. So, well, I'm not sure quite what we'll do about that. But going forward, unfortunately, you missed out on that one. Now, an interesting one, those who know me, I'm not allowed more than a couple of cups of coffee a day. And on the first morning, just throwing this one in, the first morning, I'm on the stand with Colin, and we're chatting away, and the doorbell rings, and I was up on the shack computer in Mrs. Butler's craft room, and the doorbell rings. So I run downstairs, and there's this poor little Uber driver with a bag with a cup of coffee in it, and he says, "I brought you a cup of coffee," and I went, "I haven't ordered anything." And he, no, I brought it for you. And I said, "Look, mate, I haven't ordered anything. You've got the wrong address." And he's, no, I got the right address. And then he says, "Mr. Colin B." And I went, "Oh, it's Colin. And I come back upstairs, and Colin smiled. He said, I heard you arguing with a guy. He said, I always buy you a coffee at an event, and I thought I'd do it today. And I thought, that was nice. And then later on in the morning, the other naughty one, Mr. Rothwell, sent one as well. And by all accounts, Colin and Martin had decided to try and get me hypo on coffee and be a bit loud and leery. But it worked, and that was a nice gesture. Outside of that, radio-wise, unfortunately, I was going to do some HF Saturday morning. I took my pretty much my Go kit with me, parked up, and configured the radio, pushed the PTT switch on the microphone to call somebody back, and the radio didn't go to transmit. It was working the last time I used it a couple of weeks ago. Basically, the Icon microphone had failed. Spent a little bit of time trying to work out what the problem was, and all I could deduce in the end was that the RJ45 plug was either high resistance somewhere or not making a very good contact, because I ohms the leads through on the mic and they all seem to be there and working, but would it go into transmit? No way, Jose. So bit of a shame, but I recrimped another RJ45 on Sunday morning, and that's now back working. And I spent probably too long on a BitX 40 trying to get an old Motorola shaver type mic to work with a BitX 40, and it wasn't until I managed to download the circuit diagram of the microphone that effectively, when you push the PTT, it shorts out the supply to the electric mic, and so you're going to transmit, but you don't no power onto the electric mic, so that don't work. It took me out. Once I found the circuit, that was it. So unfortunately, that microphone has now gone back into the stockpile, and I'll have to think of something else. But a little bit of trying to get stuff working, a little bit of a lot of operating on Talk Group 9480, and generally having a good time. So that's what I've been up to. So I think we've all been pretty busy, guys. Okay, I'd like to thank all of you for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Leslie Butterfield G0CIB.
It's been really good, Martin. Then you got one of my pet topics on, which is I'm not. As soon as I hear that, there I was.
I knew you'd be happy. I knew you'd be happy. I'd also like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik, KB6NU.
Oh, my pleasure. Always a blast.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you, Dan. You know, we're all in it together. We do have a bit of a giggle, which is good. And Mr. Edmund Spicer, M2MMG.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. 73.
Right, I'd like to say 73 short, and we'll continue with the rest of the podcast. 73.
Cheerio.
73.
Bye.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
Now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. First off, we'd like to thank listener Tom, EI5, India Echo Bravo. He's the club secretary of the East Leinster Amateur Radio Club, and he's let us know that the group are proposing to read the IRTS, the Irish Radio Transmission Society's news on the 4 meters as a pilot over the next couple of months. So to catch this at 10:30 a.m. GMT for 3 months on the first Sunday of each month using FM mode 70.350 megahertz. So you'll be able to catch the news being read by the group. QSLs may leave a comment on the club's website. Out of interest, if you're interested to know, they'll be using a Anytone AT588 operating at 40 watts into a flower pot antenna hoisted up as high as they can get it in a nearby tree. So listen up for the announcements there on 4 meters of the IRTS news, and that'll be starting on Easter Sunday, the 4th of April. So good luck to the guys there. Now our next news here, great news here, the RSGB who have been doing remote invigilation exams during the COVID-19 panic. They've passed over 3,000 candidates at foundation level, and has even got over 300 people passed at full licence level. However, with the UK government roadmap for exiting the COVID-19 restrictions taking effect, it means the RSGB will now be able to do in-person invigilations now going forward. So they're going to start accepting bookings from examination secretaries, say in the very near future. Obviously, all current protocols will need to be adhered to, etc. And I say great news there. We're going to have, say, in-person invigilations back in place there from the RSGB. So good luck to the guys there. So best thing to do is contact your local club, etc., who may be conducting training, or say contact the RSGB director. They'll be able to point in the direction of a club that will be doing training in your local area. And unfortunately, some bad news to finish off the News in Brief section, where we're being advised that Ham Radio Friedrichshafen in Germany has been cancelled as an in-person event. The event was due to take place on the 25th and 27th of June this year, but unfortunately, due to continuing restrictions of COVID-19 in Germany, this event has not going to be able to take place as an in-person event in Friedrichshafen. Now say they've postponed the event till next year, and next year's dates are already announced as the 24th and 26th of June. So say we start looking out for hopefully cheap flights, etc., to go to Friedrichshafen. Now the ARDC are aiming to do some online events to promote obviously amateur radio in Germany into the worldwide audience, the European audience, etc. So check out the DARC event, and so you might be able to get your fix for what they might be doing online. So say disappointing news that we've lost the Ham Radio Friedrichshafen event. Right, now we're going to head over to our features episode, and firstly we're going to catch up the RSGB on a Q1 update, and then we're going to have our feature on amateur radio and scouting. As always, guys, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Well, hi guys, for this feature I've got an update from the RSGB on what they've been up to over the last few months. Tonight I'm joined by Mr. Steve Thomas, M1ACB. Hi Steve.
Hi Martin, thanks for having us back again.
That's good. And Steve is the General Manager of the RSGB. We have Mr. John Rogers, M0JAV, as he likes to tell me, just another volunteer. And you're going to talk to us about Ofcom's EMF covering, aren't you, John?
I am, that's correct.
That's good. And last but not least, because I spoke to Tony before, Mr. Tony Kent, G8PBH, and Tony is going to tell us about what's been going on with the exams.
Yes, we'll do, Martin.
Good. Right. There's been a lot going on over the last year, and obviously we've carried on. Steve, as a country, we've made some phenomenal move forward during lockdown, haven't we? We've had a year of lockdown now. What do you see as the difficulties that people have had getting into amateur radio as we've gone forward?
Well, Martin, you know, because we've spoken before, that last year brought, let's call it devastation, I think, across the world. And we all faced the effects of the pandemic. But at the RSGB, we think we rose to the challenge of supporting radio amateurs in the UK and provided new ways for those people to get started in amateur radio or come back to amateur radio. That was our big focus. So you know that in April last year now, we launched what was an unprecedented campaign for us with the NHS called Get on the Air to Care, the hashtag GOTA2C. And the aim was to support radio amateurs, counter social isolation, raise the profile of amateur radio amongst people looking for something different during the lockdown. We ran this, the media campaign was a big part of it. So we ran the media campaign for a whole year, and it gained widespread coverage across the TV, BBC News Online, BBC local radio stations, national newspapers, as well as other news outlets, NHS videos and social media. And it was supported by the amateur radio media and societies across the world, including ICQ podcast. And we spoke, I think it was last September, didn't we?
We did.
That media campaign, we worked with a media monitoring company, and they tracked our coverage of the numbers, so what penetration we were getting. And we're fairly confident that we had a potential reach last year, 2020, of around 35 million people with that campaign. And most of those were hearing about amateur radio for the first time. Let's face it, out of 35 million, most of those are going to be hearing about it for the first time. So that was really something huge for us. And if you type GOTA2C, the hashtag, into an online search engine, it brings up nearly 7,000 results. And that's fantastic for amateur radio to reach that many people. And the campaign was, we received the Amateur Radio Newsline International Newsmakers of the Year award, which was fantastic. But the Get on the Air to Care campaign, it was also a framework for a range of all sorts of other fresh activities that enabled new and existing radio amateurs to access and enjoy amateur radio during those difficult times. So I'm sure we'll talk about some of those in a minute. But clubs and groups have stepped up enormously during that time. They've done a fantastic job of training people coming into amateur radio. They've run regular nets. We've been seeing the anniversary nets happening, a year later recently, keeping in contact with radio amateurs and encouraging them to get on the air. There's been Zoom meetings. And a lot of clubs have found their membership has actually increased because they've had this wider reach through some of the online activities. And those meetings often include people from all over the world. So that's been fantastic. Remote invigilation has been absolutely brilliant for us. We know 3,100 or so candidates have come into amateur radio and passed their foundation exam. So 3,100 new foundation licensees, and nearly 1,000 have progressed on to intermediate, and nearly 350 have passed their full exam. And that was only introduced in October. So, and intermediate, of course, we only started doing that in July. So not everybody passes those exams first time. So we've administered a lot more exams than that. The total now, I think we're up to 5,300 exams have been remotely invigilated since the lockdown. So once we launched those, I think it was the 14th of April last year, then 5,300 exams have been administered. And there's been a fantastic team of people looking after and remotely administering those exams. It's been amazing. Basically, it's changed the face of amateur radio, certainly in the UK. And for us, it's been an amazing success story.
Yes, certainly sounds like it. And as you say, a lot of people coming back to the hobby, a lot of new people on the radio. And I think, you've been driving it as well as we've been driving some initiatives. And I wasn't around. I got my license, 99, 2000. I wasn't around in the heyday, but I've got to say, I think this had a real shot in the arm to get the hobby going again, and I think it's done well. Steve, what would you say is the biggest highlights from the RSGB this year, or in the last 12 months you've had?
Well, the campaign, really, we're incredibly proud to have brought amateur radio to the attention of so many people. We're absolutely delighted with the media coverage, and it's been cited by many people as the reason that they've returned to being active radio amateurs, because they've been reminded about amateur radio, and we've helped hundreds of people get their license back and get active again. That's been amazing. The remote invigilation, of course, this has enabled people to get involved and progress, and provided a focus for some people during the lockdown as well, if they needed that. So it's been a way of being in touch with people and learning new things and meeting new people. So that's been a highlight for us. Some other things that we ran as well, there was 2 series of what we called the Daytime Hope QSO parties. So these were just activities during the day, contests, if you will. demonstrating the strength of amateur radio during the pandemic. There was a total of, over 293,000 QSOs in the QSO parties, with entrants from 39 countries, I think it was, and 6,500 logs were entered. And that was from Europe, North America, Africa, Asia. So people were entering the contest worldwide. But what made them different was it was daytime for people that were at home. And then we carried on the Christmas QSO parties, gave another focus around Christmas time for Get on the Air for Christmas, as it was at the time. Then the convention. We normally run the face-to-face convention in Milton Keynes, and we have about 500 people normally join us across the weekend there. And this year we ran it wholly online, and we had 3,500 people join us live across 24 countries: New Zealand, Japan, Norway, Canada. And the presentations are still there to be enjoyed on YouTube. So that was a fantastic success for us as well. We've been running something called Tonight at 8. This was one of the ideas of one of our board directors, Stuart Bryant. Free monthly online webinars. So we run that on the BATC streaming channel and on YouTube as well. Take live questions on that. We've run, I think it's 8 so far, covering subjects like Raspberry Pi and antennas for small gardens and SOTA and GNU radio. Hundreds of people join us online for those and ask questions of the presenters live, and thousands of people catch up with them afterwards. On YouTube, we make them freely available so people can go back and watch them again and again if they want to. But we have thousands of people watch those. So, you know, there's been some amazing things going on. We just to support the influx of amateurs, we also shipped over 10,000 exam books, would you believe, in the year. And this enabled the people that wanted to learn from home, with a lot of support from training organisations providing online training as well. But we shipped a lot of those books, as I'm sure I've told you before. Some of those we shipped from the HQ office when we locked down, first of all, when one of our warehousing companies had to close down during the lockdown. So the staff have been absolutely fantastic, and the volunteers just the same. It's been a huge effort. So I'd really like to pay tribute to, first of all, my team at the RSGB, just 16 people, 10 full-time and 6 part-time, as I always let people know. They've all been working from home, doing an incredible job of supporting radio amateurs through a very tough year. Then we've got a team of over 300 volunteers, which have done an equally amazing job, fantastic effort. They provide local and national support and benefits to our members. So it's been absolutely amazing to see everybody working together on this, really just for the good of amateur radio.
Yeah, it certainly has, Steve. And as I said earlier, amateur radio seems to be more exciting at the moment than it has been for a long time. Now, with people learning at home and learning online and the practicals no longer required, after lockdown, is it fair to bring the practicals back, or should we just leave it as is? I don't know. I'm maybe putting you on the spot on this one.
That one I might leave to Tony. It's let's call it an active discussion, I think.
Okay. I mean, I don't want to put an awkward one on you there, but I think that people learning online has certainly gone well. In fairness, I know I could have probably done it online without a club, but then it depends on your initial knowledge. There are lots of different ways people learn. But let's talk to Tony then. One of the big points recently the RSGB's been considering, Tony, is going straight to full license. Now, I've been a very big supporter of the 3 license tier system, even though I went straight to full license. And I did have a bit of a conscious thing saying, am I saying don't do as I do as I say on that one, Tony? So what do you think?
Right, well, yeah, interesting way of putting it, but it's something we've been actually thinking about for a few years. It sort of took a back seat due to the syllabus review, the major syllabus review we held, and then and then it got delayed a little bit more due to all the changes, obviously this year that you were just talking about with lockdown. But we thought it was about time to bring this back. First thing I should make absolutely clear now is that we're not thinking of this as a replacement for the current 3-stage process. Indeed, it's something that would run in parallel with the 3-stage process, and it would address a completely different group of people. I mean, essentially, we believe there's a demand from potential radio amateurs who have had, say, a career in radio or electronics. Maybe they are students of STEM subjects like electronic engineering or physics, or indeed have been radio operators in the forces or emergency services. So, I mean, I've heard firsthand from such people when I used to be on the desk. Well, hopefully I will be in the future if we get out of this and Hamfest is back. But on the exams desk at Hamfest, I would hear from such people. They'd come up and just ask the question, "Can I go straight to the full license?" And I'd have to turn around and say, "Well, no, there's no option for that. You've got to go through the 3 stages." But it was sort of quite clear from talking to them that they kind of viewed the 3-level system as a somewhat lengthy and off-putting process, particularly as they already knew most of the material that they would need. So basically, we hope that the direct to full may kind of lower the perceived barrier to them actually becoming fully engaged in the hobby. And we think there's some benefits for the hobby in general, because these would be the sort of people that, for example, could advance the technology based on their particular skill sets. Also provide sort of training and mentoring for others that want to come in through the 3-stage process. So there's potential benefits for the hobby as well as these individuals in getting them through to the full license as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, Tony, if somebody, for argument's sake, had done an intermediate course, had done the foundation exam, could they bypass the intermediate and go just take the full license exam? Or once you've started on the 3-tier system, have you got to work your way through it? What would be the suggestion on that one?
Well, I mean, I think we would regard the direct to full as being open to absolutely anyone, in the sense that there would be no prerequisites in terms of professional experience, and neither would there be any artificial bars in terms of what they might have, what license exams they might have done in the past. Basically, anyone who believes they can train to the level required would be permitted to take the exam. So although we haven't actually made any final decision whether somebody who, let's say, is already embarked on the 3-level process will be allowed to take the direct to full, I think it seems unlikely that such a bar would be appropriate. And indeed, we are seeking to set the level of the direct to full exam such that there'd be no advantage to be gained. For example, I think I'll use the term gaming the system, which some people have referred to, where they think might be easier to do foundation intermediate than direct to full rather than just the full exam. So that will be something that we'll be very much aware of when setting the standard of the exam.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept, and one that I don't know. I'm sitting on the fence. There are people that can go straight to full. There are people that need the 3-tier, and I think we're offering the best of both worlds with it, if I'm being honest about it. But if this is likely to happen and the full license, straight to full license happens, when you foresee it maybe happening?
Well, there's a number of things we need to do before this can actually come into effect. I mean, first we need to analyse the consultation responses. We've got over 1,200 of them to work through, and there's a small group, the examinations and syllabus review group, that will be doing that. Following that, of course, we'll need to make any changes and tweaks to the syllabus and exam specification the draft that we had published. So there may be some useful input from the community that we can use to tweak that. So we'll need to do that. Once we have hopefully a final version of the syllabus and exam specification, we'll need to get approval from the Examination Standards Committee and therefore Ofcom, who are represented on that, and the RSGB board. Then we'll need to publish the syllabus and set up an exam question bank. Now, based on my experience of the syllabus 2019 introduction, it will take a little while to do all of these things. So, even assuming that it gets approval from ESC, Examination Standards Committee, and the RSGB board in the first round, I don't think we will have Director Full available until early 2022, I think, at the earliest.
Well, that sounds reasonable. And I think if anybody thinks it's going to be an easy walk in the park, think again, because I remember when I did my exam a good few years ago, I think it was 90 questions in one go. If you add up the foundation, intermediate and full, at the moment that's a lot more questions than that. So, it isn't going to be I'm only going to have to do 20 questions. It will be a proper full exam. I have no doubt on that one. So, yeah, if it works for somebody, that'll be good. Would you say, Tony?
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not going to be an easy ride. But to say, I mean, we need to look at all the comments that people have sent in and take those into account in the final version.
So let's move on to John. Right, I'd like to bring John in now, and John's going to talk to us about the new EMF rules that Ofcom are looking to get us to do. And in fairness, I'm not going to comment on this one because I've made my comments. I want to hear what John's got to say and what the RSGB's feeling on this one is. So, John, good to have you on board. What are the changes that Ofcom are making to our licence conditions?
Okay, perhaps I should start off by introducing myself. I'm Mike 0 Juliet Alpha Victor. I'm one of the current directors of the RSGB, and I also am chair of the EMC committee, which is the group that is looking after the ENF aspects. So one thing that people sometimes don't realise is that amateurs have always been required to take safety precautions against harmful effects from high intensities of RF radiation. That's what it says in our current licence. But with all the recent fears of possible problems from things like 5G masts, Ofcom have decided to change the regulations, and in their usual way, they've added 3.5 pages to the licence conditions just associated with this one item. It's a little complex to explain because there is an organisation called ICNIRP, the International Commission for Non-Ionising Radiation Protection, who provide guidelines. And those guidelines are presented as basic restrictions, which means that if somebody doesn't get more RF than that, they'll be fine. And also reference levels, which is how we can actually determine what the strength of the electric and magnetic fields are. Right. And what they've done in the changes is that they've said that the exposure levels must not exceed these basic restrictions in terms of electric and magnetic field strength where a member of the public is or can reasonably be expected to be when transmissions are taking place. And as I said, they decided that they needed 3.5 pages of Schedule 3 in order to explain that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to ask you what we've got to do to comply. I've seen the Ofcom spreadsheet, and I worked out for a yacht owner what I believe the spreadsheet is telling him. There are a lot of non-amateurs that are going to suffer big time because they don't understand what this is all about. But what are we going to do then, John?
Well, we've got to show compliance with these basic restrictions. And in order to do that, you need to assess this electromagnetic field that comes out of your area, if you like, and measure how strong it is where a person can be. And in order to do that, you need to find out what the field strength is at given positions close to your transmitting antenna. Having done that, and there are a number of options for the ways that you do that, the calculator is one, then you need to keep a record of the fact that you have made an assessment. So what they're saying is, we've always been required to prevent harmful effects. Now we're going to specify what those are exactly in terms of volts per metre and amps per metre, and you have to make an assessment as to whether you meet it or not. Now, one of the simple ways of doing that is to pick up the RSGB calculator off the RSGB website and feed in the power you're using, the type of cable and the length, and the type of antenna you're using, and it will then tell you what your effective isotropic radiated power, EIRP, is, which you can feed into the Ofcom calculator, and it will tell you how far away you need to be from the antenna.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if I worked it out right, my colleague at work has a yacht with a 10-metre mast, and he is running 25 watts. And I said to him, by putting those two figures into the Ofcom spreadsheet, if I understood it correctly, people are not supposed to be within 1.6 metres of the radiating antenna. Well, since he's got a 10-metre mast, he's perfectly okay. But a lot of people were panicking outside of our hobby because they don't understand this. And boat owners get boarded every now and again by the customs and whatever. And that's one of the documents they're going to have in their boat log or ship's log. So, yeah, interesting on that one. So we've got to keep a record. Is that any particular record, or is it just a printout of the spreadsheet?
The printout of the spreadsheet is one of the things you can do, and perhaps it's better if I look at the options for the assessment first, because each of them has a different type of record. But the other thing that's interesting about your boat owner is he's almost certainly got a vertical antenna on his boat, not a dipole, horizontal one. Therefore, the 1.6 metres is always taken to be from the nearest part of the antenna, which would be down at roof level, I would guess. Unless he's got a small VHF stuck on a big mast, in which case you're right, it's too high.
It's a yacht, so it's a 10-metre mast, so he's well out of the way.
Good. Well, I've got a narrowboat, and certainly I use verticals on that a lot, and there the distance is from all parts of the radiating antenna. But to go back to the options for assessment, they've given a whole list of 6 different things. First of all, if your manufacturer or your professional installer gives you some specific instructions, if you follow those and keep a record of how you follow them, then that's one way of showing compliance.
Right.
They've been kind enough to give us the calculator that you mentioned you used. It's called Ofcom's calculator. The advantage of that is that they're saying that it gives an answer that is acceptable without you having to prove the method. So that's great.
Right.
And if you run that, then all you need to do is to keep a record that you run it and what the results were in terms of the separation distance and how you intend to make sure nobody comes inside that separation distance. Nobody gets closer to any part of the antenna than the separation distance.
Yeah.
Now, because EIRP is not a well-recognised term to most amateurs, we produced a front sheet which is on rsgb.org.uk/EMF. And what that does is it takes your power and everything else and converts it into the EIRP, feeds that EIRP into the Ofcom calculator, takes the results back and gives you all the information on the front sheet of the spreadsheet, which if you print out is an adequate record. In fact, you can use any calculator you want, but the difficulty is that if it's not one of the standards like RSGBs or Ofcoms, then you have to demonstrate that the calculator or the calculations that you do demonstrate accurate results, which is not so easy. The 2 other methods are to make measurements. That also isn't as easy as it might be, because just like your own calculations have to follow a standard, so do your measurements, and you also need calibrated equipment. So making measurements is possible, but it isn't just as easy as some people think it is. The big win that we had as part of the consultation process was to get the Radio Society of Great Britain recognised by Ofcom as a representative organisation that could do the assessments for you. And by that I don't mean each individual person, but for different groups of antennas, we will do the calculations and produce pre-assessed configurations. Now, if you can say that my half-wave dipole is 6 metres up in the air, and using the work that RSGB have done, this is known to always be compliant, then keeping a record of that will also give you compliance. The important thing is that whichever way you work out the separation distance, you also need to specify how you make sure nobody is closer than that while you're transmitting.
Yeah. Well, I've looked at a lot of posts on the internet and various bits and pieces there, John, and there seems to be absolute hysteria amongst some amateurs. And from what you've said and from what the little bit I've looked into, if we're responsible adults, this isn't difficult. And it's not, okay, Ofcom are asking us to do it in the UK, but I hold an extra class licence in the States. That's a requirement. in the States if I want to operate a lot of power out there. So I don't see what the problem is, and it doesn't seem like a hell of a lot of work, but it certainly makes us look responsible adults when, you know, people start getting upset and say, oh, your antenna's up, I'm going to it's just killed my cat or whatever. You know, it's the right thing we've done, so that when Ofcom get involved, they go, no, you're being silly, Mr. Neighbour, and move on, I would suggest, John.
I think that's right. The other difficulty that people are having is that they're not realising what I said at the beginning, which is they've always had this requirement. So there is a slight change in the ICNIRP, the standards organisation, reissued in March last year. The levels, the reference levels, they changed them slightly, and they become particularly onerous below 10 megahertz, because there, in addition to the normal heating of the body by RF, there's also something called electrostimulation, which makes your nerves tingle. And that is a peak level limit, not an average level limit. So the difficulty is changing in meeting the levels below 10 megahertz frequency, and that's why you only have to be compliant with that a bit later on, because people have got to work out the cases and what the limits are according to the new standard. But I think paranoia is not the right response. If you look at the latest guidance from Ofcom on their website, ofcom.org.uk, they've given some specific guidance for amateurs. If you look at the distances that you need to be away, they're all aren't there or thereabouts 5 meters, so it's not actually that difficult to achieve.
Yeah, I must admit, when I looked at it, and a number of my colleagues have looked at it, this is not a difficult one. This is not going to really kill off amateur radio as per the panic people did earlier on. So, John, when do you think this is actually going to come in or need to be done by?
Well, there are 4 key dates, really. The first one is if you want to make a representation about this. I mean, RSGB and 255 amateurs actually made responses to the consultation last year. If you want to make a mother representation, the Ofcom website tells you how to do it. You've got till April the 18th. The new licence conditions are expected to come in on May the 18th. And then you have to show you're compliant with them by November 21, November this year, for above 10 megahertz, and by May next year, May 2022, for less than 10 megahertz. And the other important sort of message is that Ofcom want to foster a climate of compliance. They don't want to have to go to a high-handed enforcement approach, but they would act against reckless individuals. So that's one of their key messages.
Yeah, that sounds right. And I think they should. We should comply. I don't think it's a major problem. Personally, I was interested to hear what you're going to say, and I've gone on record as saying, as a responsible adult, I think this is something we should do, regardless of anything else that people are kicking off about. As responsible adults, I don't see what the problem is. But there is now, if it comes in the next couple of months. Tony, how's this going to affect the new licence exams, for argument's sake? You know, right, for foundation licence holders, they're less than 10 watts. So it shouldn't really affect them. But going forward, are we going to have more questions in the question pool? Does that effectively make the exams longer? I don't know. I'm probably asking a very loaded question. I'm just thinking this through as we're talking to John here. There's a lot more work for the exam, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, certainly. There's no doubt there will have to be changes to the syllabus and exams at all levels, including, of course, direct to full. Actually, even at foundation level, because you know it's 10 watts EIRP is the limit. So if a foundation licensee is putting 10 watts into a high gain antenna, then potentially they could be above the limits. So it's something that had to be considered. I mean, Ofcom have made it quite clear through their representation on ESC and their response to the preliminary ESC approval of the Director Full going out to consultation that they want something in there. Now that we're starting to become clear of the details of these new regulations, ESRG are looking at ways to introduce EMF matters in the syllabus. I mean, the areas which it particularly applies to are the licensing section and the safety section of the syllabus. A lot of the underlying theory, relevant underlying theory, for example, electromagnetic fields, antenna gain, and that sort of thing, are actually already covered in the technical parts of the syllabus. So people have got the underpinning knowledge there, but we need some specifics to go along with these regulations. So we'll have to put something in, but of course we do. I mean, to answer one of the points you made there, we do want to avoid making the syllabus bigger. So, I mean, to balance that, we're going to have to look to remove some learning points in other areas. So perhaps look at some of the stuff which is perhaps not so relevant now, and consider taking that out so that we don't end up enlarging the syllabus or exams. So, these changes are going to appear in the new 3-part syllabus version 2, which is under preparation at the moment. So they're currently being worked on, and of course they will appear in the Director Full syllabus when the final version is published. So it's all in hand, but there is going to be a change. There's no doubt about that.
All right. Well, this is a question from me because I really don't know the answer for this one. I haven't taught a foundation course now for nearly 18 months. So, but from what I remembered, a foundation license holder didn't have to know about decibels. Therefore, unless it's changed, they're going to be also hit with something they won't know about when you say, well, you've got a gain of 3 dB and a cable loss of 6 dB and an antenna gain of 6 dB, for argument's sake. They won't necessarily understand that, will they? Or have I missed have changes happened I've not looked at in the last 18 months?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, the underpinning knowledge I talked about in terms of gain and electromagnetic fields comes in at higher levels, foundation level, not so. I mean, I think this is where, following up on John's points a little bit earlier, where the RSGB can help by, if you like, putting out these if you like pre-assessed configurations, which the foundation operator can ensure that they are complying with. But we wouldn't be asking questions in the exam such that you're standing 3 meters away from an antenna, you're running 10 watts into it, it's got a gain of 9 dB. Do you comply with the with the regulations? That's not the sort of question we're going to be asking. I mean, that's the purpose of the calculators and possibly pre-assessed setups. Now, what we'll be asking is that they know, I mean, in the licensing section, that they know that they have to consider these things, so that the licensee knows that there is a problem. That could be in the safety section, that the foundation licensee knows there is a risk in principle, and in the licensing section knows that there is a requirement to consider that risk. But I don't think even at full level we're going to be asking people to do calculations in the exam of whether a specific setup complies with the regulations, because we can't expect them to do something that these calculators are doing. It's far too complicated at any exam level to ask for that.
Yeah, right. As I say, I wasn't trying to pick a fight or thing. I was just trying to understand it myself on that one. But thanks for giving us the heads up on that, Tony. Now, remote invigilating exams, are they likely to carry on for the rest of the year, or are we hoping to get back to the clubs doing it? What's your thoughts on that one, Tony?
My thoughts are hopefully a bit of both. I mean, I hope that as soon as it is safe to do so, then clubs will be able to start offering exams again for those candidates that prefer to do their exam in a invigilated in-person kind of setting. So, what we're hoping to do is to link that to the government roadmap for exiting the COVID restrictions, and as soon as the restrictions that make it difficult to hold in-person exams have been lifted, then we hope to clubs will be able to offer exams again. So that would be probably be looking at from the 21st of June all being good, and no more variants or anything which upset the current progress towards getting out of this thing. There'll be a formal announcement. We're planning a formal announcement on this shortly. But that said, we also hope to actually continue offering remote invigilation in parallel. It clearly fulfills a need, especially for those who don't have easy access to a club that provides exams. So we hope that will continue. It's clearly had a part to play in these very impressive figures that Steve referred to earlier on.
It certainly does. And I think what you're saying is we're going to remain flexible. We've moved the hobby on. There will be both trainers doing full-time training, one-to-one training. There will be online learning. There will be exam centres running exams. And there will be, online exams. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that the more flexible we can be, the better. I mean, there are still issues to resolve as we go forward. I mean, as you know, that we have already permanently discontinued the intermediate level practical assessments. So a perfectly online learning route through taking the exam online is going to work at intermediate and full, no problem. We haven't made any decisions yet. What is the situation with foundation practical assessments? At the moment, they remain suspended, and they will do, pending a sort of proper review and consultation on what is the best way forward there. But clearly, we need to think about that, because if we move to an online system where people train online, and some clubs, Essex Ham, for example, and you've got the Bath Distance Learning team, are doing a great job of providing training for candidates. But clearly, it's not practical to do practicals in that situation. So or at least in-person practicals using bits of kit. Maybe there's some online options that we can explore. We'll have to look at that. But at the moment, we hope to run both systems in parallel to be flexible. As I say, there are people. This is another one I've had at the National Hamfest. Somebody comes up. I mean, from maybe I remember one came from a rural part of Scotland. He says the nearest club is about 120 miles away that offer exams or something like that. I can't remember the exact distance, but it was certainly sounded to me the sort of distance you wouldn't pop down every Wednesday night to do your training sessions. So clearly there is a demand for the online offering.
Yeah, I agree with you. We need to make it. We want people in the hobby, not work in ways of excluding them. So thanks for that. There, Tony, that was good. Steve, let's come back to yourself. Welcoming thousands of people back into the hobby. I was going to say, what can you do to help them and get them up to speed? And I mean, obviously, the practicals, I think, are a very good thing. But I know the guys at CamHams have started doing some practical type videos, haven't they?
Yeah, well, there's a few things that we've done. So because of the remote invigilation, that was a big change, of course. Practicals changed. But through doing the online convention and the Tonight at 8 webinars, we think that gives people some things they can watch and they can do at home. Our AGM this year, for instance, is going to be online. So, we're moving more and more towards that approach, online and, video and things like that. So when the practicals stopped, we've filmed some foundation practical skills videos. We actually filmed those at the National Radio Centre. And we did that because people weren't able to do the practical. So this is what they've missed. And people can go back and look at those many times. And we got so many people watching those, sort of thousands of people, 8,000 people, I think, have watched those foundation practical videos that we thought as soon as we could, we'd try doing, some more practical ones. Because the idea there, we called them useful practical skills for new licensees. And the idea there is really to encourage people to try building something. It's not huge kit building stuff. It's just try connecting, do a bit of soldering, cut an antenna yourself and, make something yourself. So we wanted to encourage those sort of practical skills. And it is just the very start, because we all know there's a huge range of things you can do with amateur radio. But just getting started is a really important stage. So we launched those videos during British Science Week. And then we had, I think, 7,000 views in the first week or something like that. We've had some fantastic feedback. So, yeah, those are the ones that we ran as sort of a follow-on to the foundation ones. Really successful. We've got our whole sort of beyond exams suite of resources, which sort of are aimed at people building experience. And those videos add to that resource. There's the Beyond Exams individual scheme. We've got a Facebook group for supporting new amateurs. There's Radcom Basics, of course. And then there's the club Beyond Exam scheme for when clubs can actually get back together and interact again. But I really think that everybody, existing amateurs, need to welcome everybody that's joining amateur radio at the moment. They've joined in the last year, because they've had a different experience coming into amateur radio than many of us did through training at clubs and talking to other amateurs or meeting other amateurs. So I think that's really important that all radio amateurs welcome these new people. We've wanted to grow amateur radio for some years. We've managed to do that now. As a community, amateur radio has increased amateur radio, if you like. So now we've all got to welcome those people in, do everything we can to support them. We'll keep providing as much as we can with online and remote ways for people to interact and do the things we do from the RSGB. But I think it really needs absolutely all radio amateurs to welcome these people in, help them. And of course, now that there is all this group of new radio amateurs in that haven't yet met other radio amateurs or been to clubs, there is an amazing opportunity for clubs to attract those people to the clubs and to share their knowledge. And I just look forward to that happening as soon as we can get back to it.
Yeah, me too, Steve. Me too. And I think, going forward, maybe some of the events this year might be only online. But guys, if you're listening to them, please join them, because it's only going to be a matter of time and we're all going to be out together. And I think we're going to have one mega party when we get together. I can see it coming. But Steve, moving towards the end here, the RSGB done very well with your Get on the Air to Care campaigns. And, you did another one over Christmas. What's the plans going forward with that in 2021?
Well, we always said that we'd run the Get on the Air to Care campaign as long as the restrictions were in place and while it was needed. So we've extended it as we've gone along, as you've said. But we need to plan to probably bring that to an end. We're preparing an initiative that we hope will bring clubs closer together and celebrate amateur radio friendship. And we hope this can link with World Amateur Radio Day. We're still working on all those plans at the moment, but we're not going to stop. We're really not. We are absolutely going to continue to support radio amateurs. I think it's hugely important that we carry on, but plans are still afoot.
Yeah, that's very good, Steve. We're glad to hear that. Well, I've taken a lot of you guys' time, so I'd like to thank each and every one of you joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Steve Thomas, M1ACB.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. It's really great to have enough time to sit and just talk about everything. It makes a big difference, so thank you.
No problems. We have plenty of time on our distribution server, so we're okay. We're not cut for time. I'd also like to thank Mr. John Rogers, M0JAV.
And thank you, Martin, for the opportunity to get the messages across.
That's great, and we're all working together on this one. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Tony Kent, G8PBH.
Yeah, you're welcome, Martin, and thanks for giving the opportunity to get the message out there to the community.
So I'd like to say 7 trees to you all, and guys, I'd thank the RSGB for coming along and giving us this update. I hope you found it very interesting.
Let's hope we can do it again sometime soon as well, Martin. We've talked about that before, so look forward to it.
Yeah, no problems, Steve, no problems.
As part of the ICQ podcast support of amateur ham radio hobby, we are pleased to announce we have a Brandmeister's DMR talk group. This group is intended to be used to allow us all to communicate around the world and help each other as an Elmering talk group. Several of the ICQ podcast presenters will be monitoring this talk group at various times of the day, and we look forward to your comments and feedback. For those of you who don't own a DMR radio and would like to take part, there is a mobile phone app called DroidStar. For Brandmeisters, you will need to set up an account and password direct with Brandmeisters. For those of you who want to connect via RF but don't have a DMR radio, other digital modes such as Yaesu, Fusion, D-Star, P25 and NXDN will be connected to TG9 480 in the next few weeks. Our thanks to Adrian Craig M0GLJ and Andrew Taylor MW0MWZ for helping make an idea come to life. Our talk group is 9480. To ensure you are kept up to date with the latest developments happening on the ICQ podcast, please visit our website and sign up for our newsletter. We all look forward to working you on this talk group as soon as possible.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to this episode's feature. Tonight I'm joined by Stuart, M0SUD. Stuart lives in the West Midlands, which is central to our country, the UK, and Stuart's involved with scouting. And one of the things Stuart wants to talk to us about tonight is how to work with the scouts. That's certainly a very, very useful thing for us to do, and it's very, very rewarding. But before we start on that, Stuart, would you like to tell us a bit about yourself, how you got into amateur radio, what your interests are within amateur radio?
Yes, so I've been a licensed, I've held a license since 2017, where I had a year where I went from the foundation through to full license. A bit of a mad one, but I did have a bit of cheating because I've got a degree in communications engineering. I'm a member of the GQRP club, and mostly because I like to see what I can do with very little and see how far I can get. Playing with stealth antennas, I haven't got really any other options, and generally mucking around, having some fun with electronics.
Well, that certainly sounds like a lot of things that would excite scouts. I know that our very, very first course we did, we had a lot of scouts did their foundation license, and back then it was an M3, and they thoroughly enjoyed it. So we've had more come through over the years, but they do like to get their hands dirty, don't they, Stuart?
Always. The more interactive things you can do with them, the better, because Scouts is all about actually learning through doing. And the more you make it sound like school, the more they start switching off and start mucking around. It's a case of just finding those nice little ways of doing something interesting that sparks an interest, and then they go, oh, okay, I've got a little bit of learning, but then I get to play with it. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I say, we did a Scout event, and I think I've mentioned it on the podcast before, but it doesn't hurt to mention it again because people will understand. We did a special event for a Scouts troop a few years back, and kind of decided that amateur radio wasn't the most important thing at the time. And we had 8 PMR 446 license-free radios, and we just gave them to the group on a half-hour basis. They had them out for half hour, brought them back. And I've got to tell you, those 8 channels were absolutely heaving. Anybody else who'd tried to be on license free that day in that area was having no chance. But based on the back of that, we did actually have 3 or 4 of the scouts come back and say, "Oh, that big radio you got there, mister, what's that all about?" And, so I think sometimes it's showing people and getting the enjoyment out there. And those that have played with, not interested in radio, but have just had a little bit of fun with 446, that's a good way of doing it, I would have thought.
Absolutely. So one of the sort of key badges that you can do with the Scout group and sort of support them in gaining is the Communicator Badge. And a key part of that is really to just get out there playing with the PMRs, get them used to using sort of a fairly strict sort of way of talking, because they will just send silly messages galore. But if you start training them into sort of going and mentioning a sort of pseudo Callsign, they start getting it quite quickly. And they have a lot of fun, and it sparks interest.
Yes, certainly does. And the Communicator's Badge is, well, if I remember right, there's a Communicator's Badge for the Cubs and there's a Communicator's Badge for the Scouts. And obviously the Scouts is up another level. But I believe if you manage to get a foundation radio license, that counts as you've done pretty much everything for your Communicator's Badge, if I remember right.
Yes. Fundamentally, if you get your a foundation license, you've got the Communicator Badge. But if you do all the work for the Communicator Badge, you've near enough got your foundation license. You just need to do the exam. It's one of the really irritating things with it, that they're not linked. That's one of the things I'm trying to improve in Birmingham, because we hold a regular event called Brandmeister for all the groups across Birmingham County, and with that, one of the options has been the Communicator Badge, and we get these kids all excited about sort of radio, get them used to playing with it, do all the work, and then we don't finish by giving them the opportunity to get a license.
Yeah, well, a lot of the time they just need the opportunity. As I say, today's society, often we're very much locked down, not just at the moment, but silly little things that, all the red tape that you have to do now in the Scouts compared with when I was a young lad, it's completely different now. And you have to make sure that all sorts of things are done, and risk assessments now before you can do things with a lot of the Scouts. And I would guess even if they go to an intermediate, you probably have to do a risk assessment on soldering in case they burn themselves.
So I've done soldering with my Scouts. It scared me. There was a lot of fear, but it was a bit ridiculous, really, because they were fine. And we've all sort of burnt ourselves a bit with soldering irons, because, I've burnt myself on the arm the other day while I was reaching over my iron like an idiot. But you sort of go, okay, I got burnt, let's get on with it. And they do. The hardest thing, really, when you're trying to do things like soldering with the Scouts is making sure they don't apply too much heat and lift tracks, which is always annoying, because it leads to some very odd repairs that you try and do to make it work. But with the health and safety side, it's not changed, really. It's just you're writing it down more than you used to. Because you always, whenever you do an activity, you've always sat down and gone, oh yeah, there's a sharp edge there. Maybe let's make sure they can't run into the sharp edge of a table, for instance. Or if they're running around a room, maybe a chair shouldn't be in the middle of the room. Whereas now, unfortunately, due to various incidents which happened, we're having to write that down more and more. But they're relatively simple to do, and if you're a radio club trying to hold an event with a Scout group, talk to the leaders. They're used to doing it. They've probably got something ready as a template, and it's a case of just understanding some of the more radio focused aspects. The hardest thing I would say really for a radio club in working with the Scouts is trying to understand the child protection side of things. There's a few aspects which, unless you work with children, you wouldn't really realise. And they're relatively simple. I mean, if you are not a leader, you should never be left alone with a child. If you're a leader, you shouldn't really be left alone with a child either. It's just scenarios happen. But, you know, you should never be left with them. There should always be at least one other adult with you. And that's important for your protection as well as for the kids. There's also things like taking photos. It seems innocent enough, but you get some children who are unfortunately in a position where they've been fostered, and there's a reason why that photo appearing on the internet could lead to people finding them again. So you've got to be really careful with the photo permissions, and again, talk to your leaders. They'll often give you ways of taking a photo and getting that child to turn their head around, or sort of go, "Oh, look over there, Charlie," and then you can take that photo, and then you've not sort of compromising their safety.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from, and in fairness, as I said, I help out 7th Bansis Scout, and I have a CIB check for the radio site Great Britain because I'm a trainer. I have one with the Scouts, and I have one when I worked in a nursing home. But it is important not being on your own, and it's not just children. It's, you know, if you've got somebody who's vulnerable, maybe somebody who's not in the Scout troop, maybe somebody who's vulnerable anyway, either mentally or disabled or whatever, you should not be on your own with them. That's the big number one rule. So I agree with you on that one. Moving on, what we're really going to talk to you today is how to work with the Scouts, how to offer your services, and I assume you're going to talk about things like JOTA and things like that. So over to you, Stuart.
Yep. So there's a few different events that you can really help with local Scout groups in being able to offer it. As you said, one of the key events is JOTA, Jamboree on the Air, and that's normally held first weekend in October, if I remember correctly. Certainly early October. And it's a worldwide event, and so it gives you an opportunity to play with lots of different frequencies, get on different bands, and just see how far you can get. If you are trying to find contact with a Scout group, the sort of ways I would recommend are going to scouts.org.uk or your National Scout Association website. There should be a group sort of finder on there. So the UK Scouts one has a group finder where you enter your postcode and it will find you the contact details for the 6 nearest groups. The other way is to try and cast your net across a wider area, and if you look for your local district or county website, so Scouts, you have your nation, or certainly UK Scouts, you have your nation, which is divided into counties, and they can be sort of Devon, or they could be just a city. It all varies on how many Scouts there are within that area, sort of idea. And then within that county, it's all split into districts, and there's someone in charge of each sort of level, and you can find their email address. They can send all the details out to all the other groups. It's a bit of a game to find some of these websites, but if you go via the scouts.org.uk group finder, those normally send you towards one of the membership secretaries. And once you've got a contact, it's fine, because then they'll point you to the right people.
Well, that sounds good. Now, only in my limited experience of South London, North Surrey, I've found that a lot of Scout leaders are actually radio amateurs. Now, I don't know if it's the same across the country. So if you are a radio club approaching a Scout troop, you know, you're probably going to be greeted with open arms. or at least if you mention communicators badges, they'll probably rip your hand off. And JOTA, even better, I suggest.
Absolutely. Any scout leader where you're willing to offer an activity, they will certainly be sort of yanking at your arm going, oh, when? Because it's just something different. It's new people in with the group to sort of share that enthusiasm and experience and to offer expertise because, you know, scout leaders, we don't know everything. Trying to offer lots of different skills. The amount of small weird things I've ended up picking up, paracord, sort of making lanyards out of paracord and things like that. Never thought I'd be doing that, but I'm doing all right with those. Cobra stitching and things like that. So, yeah, scout groups absolutely happy to listen to what you want to offer them. They may have some recommendations in different ways of presenting it, but, you know, they're more than happy. There is a Amateur Radio Scouts Active Support Unit. It's a nationwide organisation with the aim being that it's a collection of people who are available. They're part of scouting, but they're not necessarily leaders. But they've all got an amateur radio licence, and they're there as a resource for groups to use.
Yeah, that having a central group certainly makes it interesting, and I was aware of that, but only for a completely different reason. And yeah, I think when we've done JOTA, I think one of the worst things you can get is have an old boy screaming and hollering into an HF radio, because unless you've got your ears tuned in, the scouts really don't get it. And I know I keep banging on about internet hotspots and digital radio, one thing and another, but if you can get other scouts to do that, at least the scouts can hear that their ears are tuned in, and you're almost guaranteed a call. One of the problems we've had in the past is slow scan TV. Seems such a great idea, except some of our continental cousins like to show pictures of scantily clad ladies in their underwear, and it's not particularly appropriate, A, with children, and B, when his mum's standing next to him. And I shouldn't say him, because I know the girls are now allowed in the Scouts. But finding, JOTA, when we've done JOTA, it's been a morning session. So they do a bit of Morse code, they do their contact on the radio, they do a bit of electronics work, and it's a whole morning of activities. And I think, you've got to keep the children with it and on side, while one of them's making their contact, or two or three of them making the contacts. You've got to find other things to do, haven't you, Stuart?
Absolutely, with that sort of thing. The round-robin sort of way of working is great. Getting them in for sort of 15 minutes. I find 15 minutes works really well, because you have 5 minutes of them sort of settling in, and there's always a bit of faff time as you're swapping over between areas. But you get 10 minutes then of their concentration, and you'll probably find if they're interested, they'll start coming back and wanting to ask questions afterwards. But the sort of things that you mentioned, it's fantastic to do a bit of something they can do on their own, something where they're listening in. The Morse appreciation in sort of like the foundation license style way is fantastic. It sort of gives them something where it's achievable, and if you can sort of show them how fast some people can do Morse, you'll just sort of blow their minds with, okay, you don't need the computer to do this, you can do it in your head. And people have been doing it for, over 100 years. If you can, try and get them to do it. So things like, if you're trying to tune in to a station, why don't you, it would be better to encourage the scout to do that, to get as far as they can, and then you can sort of do the final touch, just to show them, there's a bit more to it. That gets them interested, gets them listening in. Anything where you can get them being practical, they'll enjoy it.
Yeah, certainly is. And one of the very, very simple things, I'll pass this to you, Stuart, because obviously you do a lot of these things. One of the things I did one year for Jota, and they kept coming back and kept doing it. I had an oscilloscope set up with a microphone plugged into an oscilloscope. And I said, you can see your voice. And they looked at me strange and said, you can see your voice. And I think they were screaming and hollering into this microphone pretty much half the day. And it was something so simple, but it kept the interest going. And, oh, look at my voice. If I talk quietly, it's that tool. And if I talk loud, it's this tool. And if I whistle, it does this, and all those sort of things. And that was quite a very easy demonstration to set up, but it worked very well in our experience.
It's visual. They get to be stupid. They're having fun, and it's the ideal sort of activity to offer them. I mean, I've done it with synthesizers, sort of basic monotone ones, just to make them play with noise, and they can sort of see how they're shaping it with filters, just to go, well, look, this is what your electronics, it's all doing that with the sound, and that can really spark some ideas. And
yeah, true. Now, I think you've already partially mentioned this, but just so that those that have got this far into the feature, how would a radio club go about contacting, say, a scout troop, offer their services for Jota?
So this is where you contact the district commissioner or county commissioner and say, we're willing to do this. Is there anyone who we can talk to? Or could you please send out a message to your various groups in the area? That is a good way of getting to more groups in with less effort, which is important in areas like Birmingham, where there's a group everywhere, it seems. You see these sort of strange buildings and go, oh, I wonder if that's a scout hut. And then you find suddenly there's a sign. That's another good way of finding groups. If you're out for a walk at the moment and find these strange huts, then yeah, you quite often find there's contact details. That will get you to the right place. When you're contacting the groups, it's good to be clear what you want to try and do with them. You know, are you wanting to do round robin, lots of little stands, or are you wanting to do one long talk? Or if you are willing to run a Jota event, or if you're willing to get the scouts to come visit your shack, you know, if you've got a club shack. These are all things where groups will be interested. The other thing that they'll be interested in is if you are wanting a donation for your time. This is something where, obviously, Scouts, they're a charity, but there's no reason why we can't sort of, you know, contribute towards petrol costs or something like that. Don't be afraid to ask. That's what's stopping you from offering an activity up. If you're upfront with costs, then it's easier with the group, and if it's free, they're likely to bite your hand off for that, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of our radio amateurs are just pleased to be able to do the right thing and spend some time putting back into the hobby. So yeah, I understand that. There does come a point in time where, you know, if it's a mega expense, if you're about to bang up a mega expense, then one or two things. Either you're not the right person and you're living too far away, I would suggest, for the Scouts. So there you go on that one. So, Stuart, if somebody wanted to contact you, have you got contact details?
I do. It's SAGRIFITHS87@gmail.com.
And we'll put that in our show notes for you as well, Stuart. So last words before I close up the interview. As I say, we've got where we can get you on email. You're obviously very active in the Birmingham area, so guys, look out for Stuart in the West Midlands. And hopefully we might see you further south.
Indeed. Who knows? Who knows where I get out and about with these things?
Yeah, well, as I say, and I will urge any scout who's listening, Gilwell Park is a phenomenal experience. It's well worth a trip if you get a chance to go there. So, yeah. All right, well, I'd like to thank you, Stuart, for giving us this interview. And as I say, wish you every success in what you're doing with the Scouts.
Thank you very much.
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, everybody, I hope you've really enjoyed our double feature here on episode 347 of the ICQ podcast. As I say, as always, guys, feel free to get in touch with us at our contact us page on icqpodcast.com if you've got any questions, queries, or want to get anything announced, say that your club might be doing. As I say, it's great to be touching base here. Apologies in relation to the lack of the QSO Expo feature. As I say, we was hoping to have that in this episode, but as I say, we will record that at another time, and as I say, hopefully use it in a future show. As always, we'd like to thank our donors who keep the podcast advert free. So Michael, K6, Golf Tango Echo, and Christopher, VK3, Tango Lima Alpha, along with our monthly subscription donors. Many thanks for, as I say, taking part in supporting the show. You can do your bit by showing your value you get from your ICQ podcast by visiting icqpodcast.com/donate. Think of the monetary value that you found in the show, and feel free to either sign up for one of our monthly subscriptions or, as I say, make a one-off donation, and everything you send our way is always greatly appreciated. I'd like to thank Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie India Bravo, Dan, Kilo Bravo 6, November Uniform, and Edmund, Mike Zero, Mike November Golf for joining Martin, M1MLB in the News Roundtable. So say, great to catch you from there. As always, you can keep up with the latest news that's going on in the ICQ podcast world as well as the hobby by sign up for our newsletter, and you can do that at icqpodcast.com. It's a great way of keeping in touch with us over the the fortnight between the two shows. Right, well, I'm going to bid you all a 73s this episode, and I'm going to make my Mrs. B a cup of tea and find her a chocolate biscuit. She's certainly very partial to a chocolate hobnob. So, guys, I'm going to bid you all 73s, and I'm going to catch you up again all in a fortnight's time. 73s all.